Hello again, Athens Church. So good to be back with you. Hope you were able to catch up with us on where we are in the series. But even if you missed last week, no worries, we got you. I'm going to do a quick review of what we talked about last week before we jump into what we're going to talk about today. So this is a little bit like, do you remember watching 24 back in the day where it was like previously seen on 24? That's essentially what this is. Last week we said that until we are fully honest with God, we just don't experience God fully. Until you're fully honest with God, you just don't experience God fully. And it's not that God's holding out on us, but God just seems like part of his character, part of his nature is, I'm not going to come on too strong. I'm not going to force myself upon you. But if you turn to me, as you move to me, you will experience me. And so hopefully this week, in your quiet moments, in your moments as you're falling asleep, moments when you're in your car, moments when you're waking up in the morning, hopefully you experienced a greater sense of honesty with God. And the promise of this series is that being honest to God allows you to have a closer relationship with God. And so this series is really all about an upgrade. It's all about going from what it is that I know, faith in God or believing in God, to this additional level of knowing him, having a relationship with him. And so much of that comes from honesty. So much of that comes from a willingness to be honest about what I'm feeling, about what I'm experiencing. And as we do, our relationship with God takes on a new form, a new level, a new intimacy, which is what I hope for every single one of us because of this series. One of the biggest challenges when it comes to our honesty with God is this word right here, the word doubt, right? I know a lot of you are thinking, are we even allowed to talk about doubt in church? I mean, don't we just put on our Sunday best and walk in here and go, oh, I believe fully, of course, I'm 100% convinced there's nothing that could sway me. Well, the reality is for all of us is that we all have moments in which we doubt. We have moments in which we wonder, God, are you really there? God, are you really who you say you are? I know for me, one of the most recent times that I experienced what I believe to be just maybe the simplest form of a definition of what doubt is. Basically, doubt being that when what I feel obstructs what I know. When what I feel gets in the way or obstructs what it is that I know. It happened to me at a friend's house recently. Our family went over to another family's house and they had just gotten those Oculus goggles. Have you put those on before? They really are, they're quite remarkable. And they said, okay, first game that we've got to play is you've got to play this game where you get on an elevator and the elevator goes up to a pretty high level, and then the door opens up and it's just nothing that you're looking out upon except just the air, and you're seeing mountains and birds flying by. And it is just remarkable how real they have made this thing, because when the doors opened, I stepped forward to the door, and I don't have like some, diagnosed fear of heights. My fear of heights is just simply, I like living, right? I enjoy being alive, as you do as well. And so the safety in me just kicked in. And it was amazing. If I were to show you the video of it, which I would never do because it's quite embarrassing, I was doing what most of you would be doing as well. As soon as the door opened and I took one look, I just immediately hit the floor. And I'm down on the ground because it felt like the most secure place that I knew to be. All the while, I know I'm safe and sound. I know I'm in the middle of this living room. I'm not actually in an elevator shaft, but what I was feeling felt so real. And we've all experienced that, where what we feel obstructs what we know to be true. And so for those of you that are here today that consider yourself a Jesus follower, you know the reality of this, that you have doubts, just like anyone has doubts. The idea that, if you have doubts, you must not be a person of faith. If you have doubts, you must not be in a relationship with God. Couldn't be further from the truth. And for those of you that maybe you're here today, somebody invited you, or maybe you've been coming for a little while and you just still aren't sure what it is that you believe about Jesus, and maybe your doubts have gotten in the way of what it is you think you believe about Jesus, I really hope that today will be a day that's for you, because all of us doubt things from time to time. All of us have lingering doubts of moments in life where that happened and that just doesn't make sense. Maybe it's you lost somebody, or somebody got sick, or you lost a job, or something happened with life circumstances moved in such a way that you go, well, either you're not really on your throne, or God, you really just don't care. I remember one of the most profound moments for me as a pastor was actually during a season of life where we were having babies. And when I say having babies, I mean my wife was having babies, but I was certainly a part of the process. But my wife and I, we have 5 kids, and there was a good decade where it felt like every time we turned around, we were going to an ultrasound appointment or going to the hospital because she was in labor, or leaving the hospital, taking home a newborn baby. And every time I would watch a baby be born, it would do so much for my faith. I remember watching this baby being born, just thinking, God, surely you're real. I mean, God, this is just an absolute miracle of life. And in the middle of this season, a coworker of mine tragically delivered a stillborn baby. And as a pastor, I got called upon to do the thing that most pastors don't really enjoy doing, which is standing at this graveside service and staring at this casket that was the size of this newborn baby that had passed away. And I'll never forget the image of how small that casket was, because there was something about it that just made me question everything. And here I am in the middle of a season where we're having babies. The baby being delivered makes me believe in God, but then losing a baby and standing there at a baby's funeral made me doubt everything about God. And here I am supposed to be leading this thing, and I remember having a real crisis of my faith, going, God, how could you? God, are you really there? God, are you really who you say that you are? And as sad as it would be, I think it would be pretty remarkable if we were to pass the microphone around and go from person to person to person to person, sharing our story of what it is that's made us doubt. It's the puzzling questions of life. It's the circumstances of life that just don't make sense, but all of us have them. And I'll never forget sitting at lunch with a friend of mine who was going through a real tragic situation, another pastor as well, who asked this question. He said, is it possible to know God even if you spend large portions of your conscious existence pondering whether he is even real? That's real. Is it possible to know this God when it feels like I spend so much time wondering whether he's even real? So today, my hope is that we would experience the freedom and experience the benefit of being honest to God, even about our doubts. The good news of today is that throughout the story of the scriptures that we have, we don't experience a God who says, you better believe, and if you ever don't believe, how dare you? No, we experience a God who says, you can be honest with me about your doubts. In fact, I want you to be able to be honest with me about your doubts, because our doubts can feel like a barrier to a relationship with God, right? I mean, this is the reason why so many of you have laid your faith down or walked away from your faith, is because of your doubts. But I want you today to know that you're not alone. No, I mean, even the great Mother Teresa, I remember reading her biography years ago and being so struck and surprised by how many doubts that she seemed to have. Here's a little quote that I pulled from this book. She says, "I dare not utter the words. I dare not utter the words and the thoughts that crowd in my heart and make me suffer untold agony. So many unanswered questions that live within me, I'm afraid to even uncover them." And maybe for some, today feels like one of those days of going, I don't want to look under the rock. And I certainly don't want to show anybody anything under the rock. And I'm certainly not going to talk to God about what's under the rock. But today is a day of freedom. Today is an invitation where God says, hey, come on, you can be honest with me even about your doubts. Last week, we looked at a sprinkling, a smattering, if you will, of these passages from Psalms where David is just crying out to God in fear. He's crying out to God in excitement. He's crying out to God in gratitude, but he's also crying out to God in anger about what he's experiencing in life. And David is one of the authors throughout Scripture that gives us not just the okay, but actually gives us permission to be honest to God. Today I want to look at one particular chapter. We're going to look at the chapter in its entirety. The good news is it's only 6 verses long, but this is such a remarkable passage because of the journey that David takes through this passage. This is Psalm chapter 13, probably my favorite psalm. Psalm chapter 13. It begins this way. It begins with a question that every single one of us has asked from time to time. 3 words. How long, Lord? How long? Have you ever asked that? God, how long? How long is this going to go on? How long are you going to let this happen? How long is the misery going to continue? How long is the suffering going to be? God, how long? He continues, he says, another question. He says, will you forget me forever? Are you just going to forget me forever? How long will you hide your face from me? How real are these questions, right? How many of us can say, yeah, I've wanted to ask that. I didn't know I was allowed to actually ask that. I've had that thought, but then I thought, no, I'm not allowed to have that thought. And I've certainly not turned that thought into a prayer, but David did. He says, how long, God? Are you going to forget me forever? How long are you going to hide your face from me? Have you ever been through a season of life where it feels like, God, you're either not who you say you are or you've just forgotten about me. You're distant. I don't feel you. I'm not seeing your activity. I'm not experiencing the peace that I thought was promised because I'm a follower of you. He continues with another really big question. He says, how long must I wrestle with my thoughts and day after day have sorrow in my heart? How long must I wrestle with these thoughts? You know that season of life, that season that sometimes feels like it's lasting for too long, where you feel like my mentals just aren't in a good place? I'm just not in a healthy place because I'm finding myself worried about things that I cannot control. My inability to reset my positivity just feels like it's never going to end. And I'm just constantly thinking about this thing. I'm not sleeping, I'm not eating. It's just so agonizing because I can't stop wrestling with the thoughts. I don't know what to do with this sorrow in my heart. And then he puts a person to it, or he personifies this feeling. He says, how long will my enemy triumph over me? David so often uses language that is typically reserved for war or for battle. But it's because the inward conflict is so real that it feels like his soul is at war. Have you ever felt that way? How long are you going to allow my enemy to triumph over me, Now, as we said last week, David's enemy is probably a little bit different than our enemy, right? I mean, David lived in a time where there was an actual feud going on. He was told that he was going to be king, but he had not yet been anointed king. And the king that was in office, the king that was on the throne, King Saul, was extremely jealous of David to the point where he had gathered up his whole army to chase after David to try to kill him. That's a different kind of enemy that you and I have, right? That's like more of the country music kind of enemy. The kind of enemy where it's like, no, I'm going to actually take a baseball bat to your windshield. I'm going to actually try to scratch the side of your car. I'm going to take a knife to your tires, like that kind of enemy. Our enemy today is very different than that, right? I mean, for most people, your enemy might be the regret of your past or the shame of your decisions, or the anxiety that floods your mind or floods your soul in any moment of solitude. It might be the stress about the future. It might be the financial uncertainty that you feel in both your bank account, but also in the bank account of your soul. Yeah, see, our enemy looks quite different than it looked for David, but nonetheless, we know what it feels like for that enemy to feel like he or she or it has control over us. And so he asks all these questions in the first two verses, and then he moves to, it's almost as if he's sticking his finger in God's chest. I mean, the audacity to be able to make this kind of demand. Psalm 13:3, he says, look on me and answer, Lord my God. It literally means, in Hebrew, it literally means not just look on me, it means look at me. Would you look at me? It's so irreverent. There's a complete lack of traditional piety that we see in so many of the prayers of the forefathers or maybe prayers of pastors that you've heard before. I mean, there's no prostrating before God in this moment, right? Saying, oh, pardon me, oh great heavenly almighty King, ruler of the heavens and ruler of the earth. If I could so bother you, oh awesome one. We are in the middle of your general authority and your ability to wholly squash anything that might cometh at your authority. Would you please, I beseech you, address my concerns? Right? I mean, that's the kind of prayer that I grew up hearing. That's the kind of prayer that I thought God welcomed. That's the kind of prayer that I thought I was supposed to be praying. Not David. David's like, he's like taking prayers out of like a UFC handbook. Like talking smack to God, pointing his finger, sticking it in God's chest, going, look at me. Answer me, Lord my God. Look at what he says next. He says, give light to my eyes, or I will sleep in death. Any of you have teenagers in your home? Does this prayer remind you of the way a teenager would talk? It does for me. When I read it, it reminds me of our kids when they get hungry, right? I mean, when they get hungry, it's like they're telling me that the world is about to end, right? I mean, they're just so whipped around by their emotions in that moment. I'm starving. I'm about to die. You're like, a little dramatic, right? I mean, save that for your Taylor Swift concert maybe, but as far as like here and now, you've never not been fed. We're gonna put food on the table. It's gonna be fine. Just a few more minutes. It's gonna be okay. But no, they're going, give light to my eyes or I'm gonna sleep in death. I mean, this is what David's doing. He's like channeling all of his teenage era in this moment. Going, I'm actually gonna die if you don't do something about this. I like this idea of light. Give light to my eyes. In other words, light is oftentimes synonymous with hope or joy. Would you bring that back to my eyes? Put that hope, that light, that joy back in my eyes. I don't know about you, but I need light when I'm facing situations that seem utterly dim or dark, right? Like when you wake up out of a dead sleep in the middle of the night because you just can't hold it anymore and you've got to use the restroom. It seems like it's happening more and more the older I get. And that feeling of walking into the bathroom going like, I can't see anything right now. Give light to my eyes or else I'm really going to die. Like I'm not going to make it. I'm going to stub my toe. I'm going to kick something. I'm going to hit something. I'm going to bump into something. It's genuinely for David, it's as if he's saying, this is a life or death situation. In other words, he's just demanding, God, fix my problem, God. I got this issue. And either put hope and joy back in my eyes, or I'm done. I'm dead. I got nowhere else to go. He says, give light to my eyes, or I'll sleep in death, and my enemy will say. Now he's talking smack. Now this is like genuine, trying to let God know, hey, you're either who you say you are or you're not. But people are talking, God. And look at what he says. He says, if you don't do this, my enemies will say. They're out on these streets, God, and they're the ones saying it. They're all talking trash about you. My enemies are talking about you, saying, I've overcome him, and my foes are going to rejoice when I fall. It's as if he's saying, all right, God, look, if you don't come through, yeah, it's not going to be great for me. But if you don't come through, it's going to look bad on you. I mean, I've told people I'm a follower of yours. I've told people I serve you. I've told people I follow you. I got the bumper sticker on my car. I've got it on my Facebook page. God, people know, and people are talking. Maybe you're not who you say that you are. I mean, he's trying to motivate God, threatening him and threatening his character. God, if you don't, they're all going to lose respect for you. Do you want that to happen? I mean, it's remarkable audacity, but it's remarkable honesty. I mean, it's as if he's saying, I'm bringing the real me because it's what's really happening on the inside. And I'm not saying that if you bring the real you, God is going to remove the problem. That's not the promise today. Unfortunately, the promise is not, if you will be honest to God, he'll fix your problem. No. But what we see in Psalm 13 is we see this significant change in David. Not a change in God, but we sense this change in David where him choosing to be honest with God somehow changes something on the inside. It's as if honesty to God creates this relationship that's strong enough to bear even the weight of doubt. That if you would choose to be honest with him about what it is that you doubt and why it is that you doubt and why it's calling into question who he is, that honesty builds this relationship that's strong enough to bear the weight of this doubt. And so he goes from, woe is me, how long, O God, are you not going to do anything? Fix my problem. They're talking trash about you. He goes from, what have you done lately? To what have you ever done? What have you done ever? I haven't seen you do anything lately, but I have seen you do some things if I take the longer view. And that begins to inform his soul, and it begins to change his perspective. The first 4 verses are so honest and powerful. But the next 2 verses, verse 5 and 6, are just as honest and maybe even more powerful. Verse 5, he says, but, contrast, but I trust in your unfailing love. I trust in your unfailing love. That word unfailing love is a Hebrew word that's used over 250 times in the Old Testament. It's not the kind of love that we all know of. It's not this like 16-year-old or 25-year-old or when you were first married or when you're dating somebody, the kind of butterflies, the feelings inside of you, the ooey gooey, the thing that you feel when you hear that song. No, it's not that kind of love. It's a different kind of love. The Hebrew word is actually hesed. And it's this word that represents this covenantal type of love that God doesn't just promise to us, but a love that God covenants with us to have. It's this love that God says, on my grave, literally the death of my son, and on the resurrection of my son, you can go to the bank with this. In fact, this love, this Hesed kind of unfailing love, that kind of love makes us realize that there has never been a moment that God has tried to write a check that he couldn't cash. There's never been a moment where God has said, I love you in such a close, honest, real, dependable kind of way, and I will ever even be able to let you down. No, this is the kind of love that says, I'm with you in the valley, I'm with you on the mountain, I'm with you in the hard times, I'm with you in the good times, I'm with you in the suffering, I'm with you in the pain, I'm with you in the loss, I'm with you even in death. And the only way we have this love is because of Jesus. The only way we can really put our hope, the only way we can really put our faith in this love is because of Jesus. Because of the salvation that Jesus offers to us through his death on the cross and his obliteration of death through his resurrection. And David points to that. David doesn't know it like we know it because he's on the front end. He's hoping for it. We can point back to it in faith, being sure of it. He says, but I trust in your unfailing love, and my heart rejoices in your salvation. I trust in your unfailing love, and my heart rejoices in your salvation. Jesus is the manifestation of God's covenantal love. Jesus is the definition of Hesed. Jesus is the personification of the promise, the covenant that God makes with us. He's the visible and tangible representation of God's love. Faith involves this certain belief, but it also involves this attitude of hope and confidence. Ultimately, faith is a person. It's Jesus. He's the epitome of it. Going, you can believe, you can trust, you can have confidence that I will never let you down. I will always be with you in the middle of everything, even in what's hard, even in the middle of the doubt. And this is what David is telling himself. The same thing that you and I have to do. We have to preach this sermon to ourselves over and over again, to the point where he moves from, God, where are you? How long is this going to happen? Look at me and answer me. Fix my problem, to, but I trust in your unfailing love, and my heart rejoices in your salvation. And then look at what he does in response to that. Last verse, verse 6, he says, and therefore I will sing the Lord's praise because he has been good to me. It might not feel like it right now, but he has been good to me. David says that over and over and over again throughout the Psalms. He says, I will sing, I will sing, I will sing. Have you ever thought about this? Why do we sing so much in church? I mean, it's kind of an interesting thing that church for thousands of years has really been the same thing. It's been the body of believers, the community of believers gathering together, singing a couple songs, opening up God's word, and talking about the power of who God is, reminding each other of what's really true. But singing has this way, it has this way of building up our internal strength, right? Have you ever had to stand up and sing something that you weren't even sure you believe in that moment? It's powerful. And when we do it every week, it reminds us of who God really is. Singing or praise, it doesn't necessarily remove our doubt, but it does, at times, it moves our doubt. Have you ever experienced this? Where you realize, oh, we're singing about how God has been good. We're singing about how God has been faithful. We're singing about how God is love. But in the moment you're going, I don't know that I believe this. But over time, what it does is it doesn't remove the doubt, but sometimes it does move the doubt so that we can see who God really is. This is what singing does. And it's why I think David over and over again is saying, I trust in you, I believe in you, I can count on you, and therefore I will sing about this. I'll sing about how good you really are. Yeah, David reminds us that we can bring the real us to the real God every day. Did you know you can do this? You can bring the real you to the real God every day. And you might bring it through prayer. You might bring it through reciting a verse, or you might bring it through singing to him. But bringing the real you to the real God is how we foster a real relationship with him. Bringing a real you to the real God is how we develop this honest, legitimate, rain-proof, pandemic-proof, suffering-proof kind of relationship with him. Where he doesn't say, oh, get over your doubts. He doesn't say, oh, get over your sadness. Get over your victim mindset. No, he says, I get it. That's real. But I want you to remember who I am in the middle of it all. And for me, in those seasons for me where I've been most tempted to doubt, I've realized that there really are two options in those moments. The same two options that you have today. Here are your options. Your options are, do you wait to be honest to God until you have all your questions answered? You can do that. You can wait until you get all your questions answered, and then you can decide to move toward him. Or you can choose to be honest to God even with your unanswered questions and doubts. It's a choice we all get to make. You can wait until you get all your questions answered and then come to him, or you can just bring all your questions and your unanswered concerns and your frustrations and your doubts, and you can just bring all those to him with you. You get to choose. I just know, as for me, in some of my most honest moments where I've been frustrated, disappointed, sad, angry about a dream that I thought was going to happen, when it's come crashing down and I've experienced that sense of anger with God, I've just decided it's better to be angry with him than just being angry without him. Yeah, I think being angry with God is so much better than being angry without God. If it were me, if I were in your shoes, if I were in your seat, yeah, what you're experiencing, it's real. What you're feeling, it's real. And you can tell him about it. But I hope you can move to the point where you can go, I'd rather just be angry with God than be angry without God. I'd rather talk to God about my doubts than wait till I get them all settled to come to him. And so today, the invitation on the table is, would you just come to him? Would you bring it all to him? The hurt, the anger, the frustration, and the doubts. And see if the same pivot that David made might be an option for us. And so, Father in heaven, I know that for so many people that it just is one of those sermons that it's like, oh, well, that's easier to preach than it is to actually do it. And that is true. But God, I ask you right now, That the doubt that's been standing in the way, the doubt that's been front and center that we've been focused on, we just pray that not just that you would remove it, but we thank you that you allow it, that you allow us to bring it. And I pray that we would do just that it wouldn't get in the way, but the doubt would become the way. That the doubt would open up an avenue to be able to talk to you about what it is we're feeling and what it is we're experiencing. And as we do that, we look forward to what's on the other side of maybe answered questions, maybe, but definitely that same prayer that David prayed. I will trust in your unfailing love, and my heart will rejoice in your salvation. And I will sing to the Lord because he has been good to me. And we pray all this in Jesus' name. Amen.